everybody to the very first seminar of the first event that the D Center is supporting. This center came about in a very unusual way. We had one of our trustees, Peter Brieger, who's somewhat involved in the digital currency and Bitcoin ecosystem, who was constantly asked to give talks at other universities. And so he went to Chris Eisgruber. Advantage of being a trustee is you can go right to the top and say, how come Princeton isn't doing anything along these lines? And so Chris, who's a constitutional lawyer, said, well, maybe you should talk to the Dean of Engineering and see if this makes any sense to do within the School of Engineering. So they came to me and I said, this is really exciting. Of course, cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and digital currency and blockchain are somewhat controversial. There's concerns about, whether this is going to, bring economies to their knees. And then there's a huge amount of excitement about it. It's been adopted as the currency of countries. So in addition to kind of the technical aspects of blockchain and using it for different applications, there's policy questions, there's political questions, there's social questions, there's ethics questions. And that's what, to me, was so exciting about having Princeton, which has this incredible collaborative environment, has an amazing policy school, has an amazing set of faculty across all disciplines in the humanities, social sciences, the arts, and engineering and science. If we could bring that brain power of our faculty and our students together to really figure out what are the deep questions to ask. The technical questions, how do we develop blockchain, the ethical, policy, social questions of the applications and how we might use them to improve humanity, which is this, the informal model of Princeton. I thought, why not do that at Princeton? That would be so exciting. So I went back to Chris and to Pete and I said, let's do this. Peter brought in 3 other founding donors for a total of $20 million. That's the money that we have in the D Center to really support these foundational activities that we're doing. So this is the first of a seminar series that we're starting up. And I'm going to turn it over to JP Singh, who's our fearless leader, my co-director, but really the thought leader and leader in general behind all the things that we've developed so far in the D Center. It's a super exciting activity. We have a big kickoff event at the end of November. We're going to have another large conference in the spring, as well as the seminar series. We're looking also at doing things like hackathons, student projects. So I'm delighted to see so many students here, starting in the middle of COVID. As a new dean, I really haven't met as many students as I'd like to, so every time I see students, it's like I'm overjoyed. So happy to see you all here. Please get involved. Please give us ideas on how we can make the D Center more impactful in this really exciting area of technology that could be the next big disruption for technology and applications. And with that, I'll turn it over to JP.
Thanks, Andrea. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So obviously, they made me do it. That's the story you heard. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few slides to talk about what the D Center is, just to elaborate perhaps a little bit. We should go through quickly, and then I want to devote the time to our wonderful, illustrious panel who are going to talk with you today. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Students, especially students, are the power behind everything, so love having more students involved. All right, so that's the D Center. The goal is really, as sort of Andrea said, there are these new technologies, blockchains in particular, that are really oriented toward, they do something new. They're oriented toward the decentralization of trust, having trust among mutually mistrusting entities without a centralized arbiter, right? And so this decentralization of trust has the potential to enable decentralization of power in society. And that's an exciting potential aspect here. And if we can do that, if there is decentralization of power in society, then that creates the opportunity to reimagine many types of financial, business, and societal applications and public good applications. So that's the opportunity. It's a new kind of approach and has tremendous opportunity, but they have significant risks, and so there are important policy considerations to be very careful about and to set good foundations in. So our hope is that Princeton will be the thought and impact leader in this highly interdisciplinary area. Right? It's centered in East, but it's really a very highly interdisciplinary area for it to be successful. helping set the proper foundations across these different areas. That's the overall goal. So what do I mean by the centralization of power? Well, the typical solution for trust, if a bunch of us don't trust one another and we have to transact or interact with one another, is to have some centralized entity in the middle. That could be a government, that could be a company, that could be a central bank, a commercial bank, or something like that, right? And so these centralized entities have amassed tremendous power over time in our society. Easy examples are you look at the big tech companies, right? They have tremendous power over us. And trust in these big centralized entities is diminishing in society, right? In governments, in large companies, large corporations, etc. So there are many ways in which people use this centralized power to influence things. Companies influence our behavior. Governments control the value of our money and influence its distribution. More of an issue in some countries than others today. And really takes control from people, limits creativity in some ways, increases polarization in society, as we're seeing, and sort of tends to cement and build upon the status quo. So can we change this? Can we use these technologies to impact this? So the Bitcoin blockchain, the original one, was a brilliant piece of work that was designed to enable trust without centralization, right? In the context of the money, but really what it does is it tries to enable trust without centralization. It gives you permissionless participation, censorship freeness, security, durability, etc. But Bitcoin is limited by its design to really be about money and doesn't allow you to build these smart contracts and applications natively. So other platforms like Ethereum and then others came up as platforms for applications. And they make different trade-offs between decentralization and functionality and performance. And now there are efforts to build Bitcoin layers to make even the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the most decentralized, a platform for applications too. So that's sort of what's going on, but these things enable applications in many new areas, financial applications, including access for the unbanked, peer-to-peer, real ownership of your money and peer-to-peer transfer, basic income initiatives. There are business applications, there are societal applications like owning your own identity rather than Facebook or Google owning your identity, owning your own data, management of authenticity, getting over deep fakes and things like that, and control of your data. And then there are some just foundational applications like digital assets, the provenance, establishing the provenance of assets, integrity, immutable data stores, and things like that. So lots of opportunities, but also a number of risks. So we think of this as three sort of deeply interacting areas. Applications that drive the technology itself, and the societal implications and policy implications. So applications, our goal overall is to sort of understand the applications that will have the greatest impact by using this principle of decentralization. Understanding their implications for what they mean for what we should really work on the technology side, what do the applications need, and the protocols and the various incentive engineering mechanisms. And really, the way to do this is to develop and deploy real applications. This is not an ivory tower research area. Right? Deploy real applications, learn from them, iterate. In the technology, there are many things that still need to be done, understanding fundamental limits, incentive design, speed and scale. It's really full stack research across computer science, economics, etc. to really do this well and at scale. And then there are the societal implications, policy and economic implications, the risks, what regulation, what kind of policies need to be, what are the implications for society? How does this differentially impact different groups in society, right? And so those kind of things need to be well understood, and I think the magic to us sort of lies at the boundary of these disciplines, right? Also in breakthroughs within the disciplines, but really at the boundary and across the boundaries of these disciplines. That's our belief, and that's the approach we're trying to take with the D-Center. So why Princeton, why now? Andrea mentioned we have all the ingredients to make this happen, a collaborative environment, interdisciplinary focus, many centers that are in sort of adjacent areas. And why now? We think the moment is kind of now. Academia shouldn't miss this area, given the importance of it and the opportunity and the potential risks. It needs to be set up right, otherwise bad things can happen. There's an early stage sort of Wild West nature that really needs scholarship and thought leadership and then policy implications and understanding. And the foundations across these areas, you need to understand the technology to develop policy, et cetera, and so the interplay and the foundations of this interplay must be laid very carefully, and universities so far haven't really led in this area. So there's a tremendous white space for Princeton to take leadership in. So our key components are thought leadership, build a vibrant community of ideas, developers, researchers, et cetera, connected to the external ecosystem. That's very important. We'll bring people here to and be sort of the place where people gather, hopefully. We'll publish scholarly analyses and white papers of some of the more important things. As you might imagine, in an area like this where money is involved, there's a lot of bias in what people say. And so we are trying to be unbiased and neutral and provide neutral information. A focus on integrated building, deploying, and research. So really building real things. We're going to hire software engineers as shared resources for projects to really build things that can be deployed in the real world. We'll have partnerships with external entities and incubators to take ideas and bring them out into the real world and get over what Andrea calls the valley of death for academic startup efforts. And some will partner with entities that are in different ecosystems. And so really a focus on making it real and working with the startup and open source ecosystems. And then there's a lot of need for education, just unbiased education. I won't go into all these areas, but we'll do some of the things that one would do in order to really develop great materials in this area that are unbiased, and then do the dissemination, the training of students, et cetera, in these areas. And overall, the goal is to establish Princeton as the university leader in this area through these thought leadership, through building real things, developing projects and startups that have tremendous impact in the world, and applications that achieve escape velocity, and then through the education and training of the future leaders in this area, the next generation. So that's sort of the goal. If anybody has a question or two, I'm happy to take them, and then we'll move on to our panel. But that's what the Decenter is all about. Any questions? Okay, Pam says no questions, and you're droning on and on for too long. Thank you, Pam. Okay, so we're going to move to our panel of illustrious faculty from different areas, and I'm going to ask them to come up to these beautiful chairs we have laid out for them. So the way we'll do this is, instead of me talking, I'm going to ask each panelist to just say a few words first, take a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and you have to do like 5 things in 3 minutes. So, and you have to remember all 5 also. So your background, how you got interested in this space, why you're excited about the Decenter and this whole area, how you first got interested. I guess I asked that twice, so there's 4 questions. And anything else you'd like to say before we get into the actual panel questions. So maybe we start with Andrés.
Sure. Hi, my name is Andrés Monroy-Hernández. I'm a new professor here. This is my 2nd year at Princeton. The area of research that I focus on is human-computer interaction. And more specifically, the area that I work on is social computing, which is really thinking about the study and design of technologies that engage many people to come together and collaborate and connect. Which brings me to why I find this space interesting. For many years, before coming to Princeton, actually, I was 10 years in different research labs in Microsoft Research, Snapchat, and other places, thinking and building technologies that bring people together and enable new forms of interaction. And so when I first learned about all these developments around crypto-related projects, I found it a really interesting new space to explore new forms of connections and new forms of collaboration. I must admit that I've been very skeptical about this space for many years, as probably many of you have. And that's also why I'm interested in this, because I want to learn more about what are some of the challenges in this space, what are some of the opportunities here. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here. One specific project that I will mention that connects to this, for the past few years we've been really interested in the development of public interest technology platforms. And so if you think about the existing platforms like Facebook, Google, Uber, and others that are all centralized, we've been working with local organizations in considering alternatives to this. So specifically in the space of gig work. So what will a Uber owned by drivers may look like, or what will a DoorDash owned by restaurants may look like. So we're actually building some of these things, not specifically using any crypto technologies yet, but really thinking of like decentralized forms of building this sort of infrastructure. So that's kind of why I find this space really interesting and compelling and very close to what I've been doing research on.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Maria.
So hello from my side. My name is Maria Apostolaki. I'm an assistant professor here. It's my second month, so I'm very new. So my research spanned the areas of security, networks, and blockchain. The reason why I got interested in blockchains in particular was because I feel that they are actually very much they're very much studied on one layer, but not across layers. And basically, this creates a real vulnerability, and with vulnerability that actually today's attacker really leverages and exploits. This is how I got into it. I like networks. I also had learned at the time about Bitcoin, and this is why I started being excited about both, and I did both. So not such a fancy story. With respect to Decenter, what I'm particularly excited about is the fact that indeed there are a lot of people that are skeptical about the technology, and I actually feel that this is a very important fact, because this allows us to have better discussions about where we're going and why, and not just like using blockchain as something that we throw on different problems just for fun or just because we want papers, right? So I feel that this interdisciplinary component of the center is really fascinating. So that's from my side.
Hi, I'm Nolan McCarty. This is my 22nd year, so I'm not new at all. Ones and twos, there's a nice pattern. I'm a political economist. I'm appointed at SPIA in the Department of Politics. So I come at this from some administrative perspective and an intellectual perspective. The administrative perspective is that I have two other hats I wear. I'm the Vice Dean of Strategic Initiatives at SPIA, and so enhancing the connections between technology, Cs, data is an important strategic initiative for SPIA. So we welcome the opportunity to work with Cs on projects like Decentral. I'm also the director of the center, or actually the Initiative for Data-Driven Social Science. So there's obvious connections between that job and this. From an intellectual perspective, I've long been interested in the ways in which big major economic and technological changes affect the politics of the United States. I've written about how economic transformations, the rise of finance, have transformed politics. I've also done a little bit of work on tech platforms and their political roles. And so this seems like a natural extension. So let me confess at the outset, I know less about the topic of blockchain than probably anyone else in this room, but it's been very interesting to dive in and come up with some preliminary reactions.
You can go to Nolan's code repository on GitHub anytime. Pramod.
My name is Pramod Viswanath. I'm new to Princeton as well, but not new to research. I've been I'm a plumber. I've been building the infrastructure for the information age since my PhD days during the .com time. So that was Web 1.0. I've been part of Web 2.0. Somewhere around 2016, I think I even know, summer of 2016, I had a grad student who was very interested in building decentralized technologies, especially wireless. That's sort of what I did a lot. And things that you cannot triangulate where you are and where you're sending it from. This was the era of Hong Kong protests and the Arab protests. And so she was very driven by this. And I see many of my students, so huge shout out. Thanks for coming here. And students also drive professors' research. So it's you may think that professors teach students, but it's quite a bit the other way around too. So we worked on building messaging apps that can trace back who was sending it, like physically trace back. And while we were presenting it and we built this, it didn't take off. Snapchat did, but our messaging app did not take off. It was called Wildfire. The Valley of Death. But then I think while talking about wildfire around conferences, and someone mentioned to us, do you know about Bitcoin? And we had heard about it, but we hadn't thought about it from as a decentralization power and tool and its currency. So I don't do any economics, so I not paid attention to it. And we got into this, and so we redid the networking stack of Bitcoin and Dandelion, how to make it anonymous, not to be able to trace back IP addresses with wallet addresses. I guess my student at the time, now she's a professor at Carnegie Mellon, so we all had our own careers. But I've never looked back since 2016. I've been in blockchains mostly at a plumbing level, trying to understand what are the basic building blocks that you would need for the decentralized internet. The underlying pipes that interconnect. And as Maria was pointing out, it's substantially more connections. It also has aspects of economics because it's a token driven, incentive mechanism driven infrastructure. So I enjoy being a plumber.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone, for the introduction. So one quick question. A couple of people mentioned skepticism. So let's just take a quick poll. I'm sure everyone's both somewhat excited, somewhat skeptical, but if you had to say, I'm excited about this area, I'm skeptical about this area, what would you say? How many would say excited? Okay. And how many would say skeptical? Okay. You can leave now, no lunch for you. No, this is great because I think the skepticism is very important. I think we really need to look at all aspects of this and really deal with the foundations and the real reasons for skepticism in various areas. So, okay, let's try to maybe now step back from your own backgrounds and research interests and how you got in the area to more broadly for the decenter and for society. And I'll ask each of you some questions, a couple of questions, then I'll open it up to the audience. So as we're doing this, please think of questions, and if mine are boring, you can prompt them and say, this is a better question, let's do this one. So Andrés, we've had application areas that have had traction, decentralized finance, NFTs, identity to some degree, gaming, some decentralized social networking type things. If you took a step, and governance and DAOs, if you said, particular areas of application that you think are most important to pursue with this decentralization of trust, what would come to your mind?
I think DAOs to me will be the most interesting and perhaps fundamental thing, at least from a perspective of how this is going to impact society. I feel like the idea of creating communities and codifying how these communities interact with each other through code is something that people in my field have been trying to do for many years, and I feel that DAOs are exactly that. Now, one of the challenges that I see with DAOs today is that they kind of presume that humans can come together and agree on what rules are, and those rules will not change. Obviously, there's ways of fixing that with DAOs. You can have proxies and stuff like that, but I feel like that's one of the questions that I kind of puts me on the skeptical side sometimes, but that also makes me excited about the idea of bringing people together and codifying these rules in this way. I feel like the other piece that I feel DAOs are particularly interesting on is to raise capital for any organization when they need capital. We have a lot of structures that are already in place, from going public if you're a company to using a Kickstarter if you're like an early stage organization, but all of them depend on the financial system as it is today, and that financial system as it is today already has a lot of entrenched organizations and structures of power that are very complicated to circumvent, and I feel like one of the cool things about DAOs is that it can circumvent some of those things and enable a broader range of people to engage in organizing and coming together. That said, another thing that I worry about DAOs is that if they are successful, they could be successful for both good, let's say a set of a local neighborhood coming together and building a DAO to help their neighborhood. It could also be used for things that maybe we are not excited about, like maybe a terrorist organization creating a DAO. They could raise funds, circumventing the traditional financial system. And so how do we handle these sort of challenges is something that I feel requires a lot of research and what I'm excited about in this space. So yeah, I will say DAOs to me are one of the most exciting and intriguing and a little bit concerning type of technology.
Okay, so governance and community. So DAOs are, for those who don't know, decentralized autonomous organizations, where governance is done through a set of rules that are encoded and immutable, although can be changed. So that's great for applications. We'll come back to further questions on that. Please think about your questions on applications. I'm going to go to the technologists first and the plumber before I come to you, Nolan. Okay. So, Pramod, there's been a lot of focus on technology in blockchains, public blockchains, private blockchains, and layering, right? Layers of blockchains. If you had to say today, what do you see as the biggest technological accomplishments so far, the one or two biggest accomplishments? And what do you think are the biggest challenges going forward?
Yeah, thank you, JP. We really know how to do proof of work blockchains, the most efficient, and find the highest security levels possible, and really very little trade-off between them. They thought there was a trade-off between security and performance, but with the right designs, hardly any. We also know very well how to build proof of stake, major achievement in the last few years. We also know how to mix them fungibly. Work and stake are different units, and space may be proof of X, proof of resource, but we understand how to mix them fungibly in a self-normalizing way, even though the units look very different. I think these are major accomplishments just from an algorithmic and structural points of view. And this has led to, I wouldn't say this has led, but these technologies have been used as a basis to start a whole bunch of coins, several thousands of them. There's no reason so many coins should exist other than they broke this fundamental conservation law of Ponzi-hood. That's another time, another topic. But the major research sort of challenge is how to have a way with so many platforms, how to have them merge with each other, how to have them bridge with each other, or this is both at a security level, the right bridges, but also from an economics, like a mechanism design point of view. What's the right way to build ways in which if there is one of the chains got taken over by a centralized authority, perhaps the others can balance for it. And how to do this in a fungible, self-normalizing way is a major challenge, and an interesting activity as well.
So interoperability and scale.
Interoperability and bridging, yeah.
Okay, great. Some people have mentioned economics, so I guess people know that in the Bitcoin blockchain design, which was the first one, even there's really no particularly new cryptography, right? There's no new computer science cryptography. The big innovation was blending that with incentive engineering, very clever incentive engineering and design. So economics has a very powerful role to play in this area. Maria, so you're talking about blockchains, but some people say this is the next internet. This is Web3, right? And the internet is a lot about networking, which is your field. So can you tell us what you see as some of the big opportunities and challenges in research from a networking perspective with regard to blockchains?
Yeah, so I really like, JB, your question in that it really expresses this tendency that we often have to go against the next fancy thing, which could be Web3, for example. And I'm not against this, I'm more interested in trying to fix the internet for the blockchain. Or another side of the same coin is basically use blockchain as an excuse to fix the internet, which is something I'm very excited about. So, but let me explain more about why I think this is particularly challenging. So the problem is that although a lot of resources have been given to and a lot of brain power to improving blockchain and having new applications, having new protocols, and all those, they have provable properties, they are so good in security and performance. But the problem is that they often make assumptions about the network that are not extremely correct, or they're not true all the time in the internet. Especially even for those that are built to work on top of the internet. So the problem here is that we often have such protocols that are really good and really secure, but they end up being vulnerable to attackers that just exploit this fact that they will go and break the weakest link, right? And so this is my research. This is what my research is about, trying really to find the interdependencies between the two layers and explain what attacks we can have and how we can protect such applications from internet attackers. And I just want to add here that this is not pure research and nothing that actually happens. In fact, 2 months ago, we had an attack against Cypriots, which is a very well-known breed. And what was very interesting to me is that the attacker actually exploited or combined vulnerabilities in the internet. So they did a P2P hijack, and they managed to also get a certificate from a certificate authority. And they, of course, combined it with with doing some blockchain specific work. But what was interesting was that the attacker really combined these two domains, and they had understanding of both domains. On the other hand, the defenders, they seem to be not in the same page. So even their initial reaction on what could have been the attack was not correct, right? This actually shows us that although the attackers have already started building really elegant attacks that combine domains, we're not there yet from the defender's perspective. So this is why I consider this particularly interesting research topic. But I should not sound like so pessimistic about it. So it's not that the network will always be an opponent to the blockchain. In fact, we actually, in the networking community, we have many new advances that can help build or improve the performance potentially of some blockchain systems, or at least we can work on the network to keep up with the assumptions that the blockchain community makes. So this is also particularly challenging, but also fascinating work to do.
Okay. So yeah, it's been a sort of ignored aspect, I think, to a significant extent. That's been a mistake, I think. But as Maria said, she's going to fix it. So it's not going to be a problem in the future. Okay, Nolan, you get the big one. And the big one is, blockchains can have the potential for reviving trust in public institutions, people say, right? And trust has eroded quite a bit in public institutions and in corporate institutions. And as you mentioned, to sort of maybe rethink aspects of politics and government through transparency, through published rules, executed by code is the contract, not relying on fallible and corrupt human behavior so much. And others worry about consumer protection, about criminal activity, various kinds of things, investor protection. So what do you see? Societal implications on discrimination and disparity. So what do you see as some of the big opportunities, challenges, implications in areas of policy, risk, society, small areas of policy, risk, and society?
So thanks for the question. As I said, I've been recently educating myself on these issues, and one of the things that I've encountered among thought leaders are what you might call two extremely polar positions. The first is what you might call the techno-libertarian position, that blockchain can essentially replace almost any institution, including the state, by replacing many of its functions. The ideas like code is law, the idea that contracts can be enforced internally through reputation and exclusion, but not requiring coercion, as you can make collective decisions through more direct forms of democracy, and therefore can completely eliminate hierarchical governance. The second view is that this is all correct, but it's part of a neoliberal conspiracy to replace governance with market mechanisms. But the one thing that both sides seem to agree with is that this can be done. It's just a question of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think I'm going to come down somewhere in the middle, not surprisingly, since I said these were polar opinions. My guess is that the technology will prove very useful in many applications related to governance and politics, but probably won't replace many of the functions of the state or even institutions of the economy. I think it will instead will primarily serve to complement rather than supplant contemporary institutions. So here's a few reasons for my skepticism about these extreme views. The first is there seems to be some debate about whether blockchain is a completely new form of organization, or whether it's an institution that will complement existing institutions by either reducing the costs of monitoring and verification, minimizing the risk of single point failure, etc. I'm mostly persuaded it's the latter. It seems to me, and I'm happy to be challenged, or since I don't know very much, it's easy to challenge. But a lot of the applications today look like existing forms that we recognize, but with some different advantages, but with some different liabilities. Even Bitcoin looks a lot like a bank, looks a lot like a payments processor, not a completely different economic or social organization. Secondly, and this is more specific to the question of trust and governance, blockchain governance doesn't really seem to involve the elimination of elites, but rather a rotation of elites. So to simplify matters, I think from my view, the major source of the loss of trust in government is the belief that government is run by a set of self-serving elites. So here, let me be a little bit glib in the comparison. In a representative democracy, the elites are those who are good on TV and good at raising money. Okay, that's our concern about representative democracy. In the blockchain governments, the elites are going to be those people who are good at math and coding. And so they're different elites, possibly. Maybe they end up being the same, I don't know. But the new elite would have to maintain the trust of the citizenry at higher levels than the old elite did. And I think that's an open question, whether or not there can be mechanisms to make sure that those people who are good at math and coding can't exploit their position. I have a couple of points of skepticism, of concern there. The first is that I think that one of the things that blockchain promises is new forms of deliberative democracy. It allows more participation online, etc. But as a political scientist, I think the real problems with deliberative democracy aren't really about aggregation of preferences, but they're about engaging citizens and informing them. It's also about really who sets policy-making agendas. It's harder to imagine how those are done in decentralized ways. Second, and this is more of an economic question, the development of blockchain applications is going to require entrepreneurs and risk-taking early adapters. If these deliberative forms of democracy dissipate those rents to those early movers, then why would they develop them other than maybe funding from Decenter? So I have real questions about whether or not you can have pure democracy in the blockchain. And finally, let me just mention one other thing. I know I've gone on too long, and that's what's called the final mile problem. There's a lot of notion that a lot of contracts and so forth can be carried out, through DAOs and online through the blockchain. I'm a little skeptical. I just bought a house. There are some aspects of my housing contract that I think will go well on the blockchain. Elimination of title insurance would be one thing that would be wonderful, but it's not clear how code is going to inspect the chimney or make sure that if someone didn't disclose that the chimney was bad, that they'd be punished. So it can't be a complete substitution for the coercion of the state and the activity of state. It has to complement. We can get rid of title insurance, but we're still going to need courts and police and other coercive apparatus to go along with it. So I'm very, this sounds skeptical, but I'm actually very excited about the opportunities here, because I think ultimately trust in institutions is going to be improved by increasing widely shared economic growth, and the efficiency of new blockchain applications can contribute to that. And many provisions of government services, quasi-governmental services like title insurance, that improvement I think will also go a long way. But I'm less certain about some of the more extreme arguments in favor of decentralization through the blockchain.
Great. So these are really great things to think about. Just two observations. I'm hoping that our plumber can also write the code to fix chimneys.
It's on you.
And I think to your question about elites, I think it's going to be both, because we have a very presentable set of people who know how to code in this room. So they might be able to be all combined in this. So questions for our panel? Yes?
When you raised the question whether I'm excited or skeptical, I didn't raise a hand because I think sort of I share both, right? So let me follow up on Nolan's question, comments at the end. In terms of the economics, how does it work? By the title, the whole point is when people are excited about decentralization of power. So far, so that we see actually the mining created another set of institution, this mining pool, right, which is highly centralized. So then if we kind of extrapolate that means maybe we're going to see a dynasty change, right? People don't like Goldman Sachs, don't like JP Morgan, maybe eventually replace them with another set of these mining pools. There might be algorithm change, let's say use proof of stake, that will actually create an even bigger one, right, eventually. So in that sense, sort of follow up on Nolan's comment about incentive, right? So entrepreneurs need to get paid to be compensated for the innovation and so on. So in the end, will this really be fully decentralized, or rather sort of just a new set of institutions?
So I don't know, do you have a response to that, or I can try to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to solve the problem. I mean, I remember that in the early 2000s, Paul Krugman made the argument that the internet wasn't going to be an information superhighway because people needed incentives to provide information. If the cost went to zero, no one provided. It turned out not to be completely right, so maybe there will still be enough incentives in rents to create, even though the user community are able to dissipate those. But it's not clear to me how it'll work out in the end.
So the argument people make about mining pools is they're aggregators, but they're not in control. So miners can move easily from one pool to another. If they see activity that they don't agree with, they'll just move to another pool. And this happens all the time. And second, a lot of the power is in the hands of the people who run nodes, not just the people who are miners. And they ultimately have the power. So there's a lot of sort of different aspects to that question. Yes?
Just to maybe piggyback off of that. So the ones that run the nodes are the ones in power. But to run a node, you need a lot of capital and you need a lot of resources. How can we see a way for enabling access to these opportunities if they want it to be so?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I think so. I don't know if anyone else here.
Yeah, so I just want to add here something that, okay, centralization is something that is definitely bad, but there is an extra attribute to it, and that's if somebody cheats, will this be visible to others? And I think this is what blockchain allows us to go more towards this direction. And centralization, although I'll go back to the network because this is where, this is what I do, but I just want to say that, for example, even your traffic, right? Your traffic will go through only a couple of ISPs, in fact. And those will have quite few visibility on the apps that you're using, on your everyday schedule. They know a lot. And then you have, these giant, hyper giants that will even go close to the ads and close to wherever you are, such that you prefer them over a smaller data center in another country. So I think that there is, we cannot avoid this centralization, but what's important is, for me, is more to go towards a case where we can see whether they act in a certain way or not.
So one other response to that is that, some of the Bitcoin works very hard to keep the nodes very small. So you can run them on a Raspberry Pi even, or on your laptop. Whereas other networks, the nodes have to be very big. In the case of things like Solana, like almost a data center. So that's the sort of difference, the scale of decentralization that exists. Question? Yes, please.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but there still are owners here, which is people will have the network infrastructure. At a certain point, you may have your computer, but in order for you to talk to other computers, you have wires that are buried under the ground, you have undersea cables. We weren't really eliminating this aspect of control and power with blockchain technology. And so I'm just curious, anyone on the panel, if you have responses. It becomes the sort of person who controls the gate controls everything. They can shut you down at any time if they want to. This, in fact, the Canadian government, which reminds me, there was a political movement that was somewhat, the truckers were blocking a certain part of Toronto and Ottawa. The Canadian government moved to stop this by preventing access of everybody involved to their bank accounts. And so that sort of power, the ability to just dictate this has to be shut down, et cetera, doesn't seem to be addressed by the current discourse. Right.
So good question. So I'll let anyone who wants to take that question. The point is that somebody has the power to even cut off your network connection, and then what do you do, right? So any Pramod?
Yeah, this is something I think a lot about as someone who works in the infrastructure and wireless. Wireless is inherently decentralized. No one power can shut it off. Verizon may be a big carrier here, but just across the border, it's not really there. So global carriers just don't exist. It's just humans are spread out too much. And the tailwinds are there. It used to be that you needed a lot of capital to become a carrier, but the tailwinds are good. Base stations have become just a few $100s. And spectrum has opened up with unlicensed 5G spectrum. Most of the network went to the cloud. So with this kind of a natural breakup of what used to be a vertically integrated box of what the carrier would run is tailwinds, and building the right economics around it and the mechanism designs around such a decentralized carrier is something I'm very interested in. I'm happy to talk actually any amount on that.
So one other thing people would say to that is that there are blockchains that can withstand the network partition even, right? So they take the whole thing down, they can still organize around that. The others that can't, right? That's also a decentralization issue. So that's one response. And the other is if someone cuts off your network, you can find other ways to then connect to the network. So it's like the miners when they got shut down in China, they all went somewhere else. Right? It's very easy to go somewhere else. So there's that kind of response as well. But it's a very good question. Yes?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious, over 10 years later, how do you guys envision blockchain to be integrated into an average American's life, right? It's like they just like earning hard work laborers, and what part of the life will come across the blockchain?
This was a question that President Ice Gruber also asked me after the NASA Hall reception. And I don't know what that application will be and whether it's 10 years, but I know when it will happen. It's not so much a time, it will be at a time when there's tremendous distrust, societal distrust in that particular area. I mean, currency sounds crazy, the dollar is really a king. But it could be governance, it could be in something as simple as maybe a gaming platform that was too much rent seeking. And somewhat not on the same scale as currency and governance, but still it will be at a time when there's tremendous social distress, like literally civil war. And that's when it's not at all an accident that Bitcoin was launched in October 2008 at the very peak of the financial crisis, entirely on purpose. So the timing will come when there is such a distress.
But perhaps or less, like maybe not even requiring civil war, right? I could imagine 10 years from now, instead of using Venmo to pay for something to your friend, you could be using some blockchain-based technology, or like the example of buying a house, like aspects of that process maybe on the blockchain. I don't think we'll be like completely all in the blockchain. I don't think that is still kind of connected to what you were saying about the Canadian example, where still somebody holds power through physical means. Like if you have the military, you can go and disconnect people's towers, and even though it may be wireless, you can still have power. So either we'll continue to have that, or maybe there will be like the emergence of kind of power, physical power attached to the blockchain. Like maybe there will be like a military unit, linked to the blockchain or something like that.
There's a lot of discussion of connecting the Internet of Things to the blockchain, and then if everyone's like, smart refrigerator is on the blockchain, then that's where your hardworking Americans will be connected to it.
Or you can send messages by carrier pigeon at that point. There was actually an internet RFC to do that, the avian transport RFC. So, okay. So, any last questions? We're out of time, but we'll stay for another few minutes if people want to stay and keep asking questions. So, any further? I mean, this question about the average American. America is one thing. In many other countries, there's a lot of debasement of currency that can happen on a whim. And so international remittances are one big application of blockchain so far, but also people want to have access to the dollar and they can't sometimes, and that's at the whim of the banks and the government. So this is an area where people are using to own their own money, really fundamentally own their own money, and have it be stable against debasement and large amount of inflation.
Just to add to that, I mean, so most of my comments were premised on whether or not blockchain could replace the functions of a reasonably well-functioning state. But there are many parts of the world where states are not well-functioning, and we'll obviously see that supplantation take place there first.
Okay, so we're seeing people have to go because it's time for class or something. So let's just give a big hand to our panel.